My name's Kerry. I'm 42. My story starts out, I was raised in church my entire life. Some of my earliest memories are a little white church. We didn't have plumbing. Um, my poppy was the preacher. Uh, it was a very wonderful place to be. Like, there was never there might have been lack of resources, but there was never a lack of love, ever. Um, he would pick me up when I was little and carry me around church while he was preaching, and then take me back and give me to somebody, and then he'd really get into it. Um, he was one of my first memories of learning about God and his love, and he showed it. My parents always, everything was about God. Of course, every family has some hiccups, but um, I think for the most part, my entire life has revolved around God in my life. Whenever I got to be a teenager, I still carried that with me. I got baptized the day before I turned 13. I was attending church with my dad, and it didn't matter how I felt that Sunday. He was going to drag me kicking and screaming. Um, I was pretty big into the youth group. I went to church camps and I went to revivals, and that was some of the most awesome times. Like, I could always, after I got saved, there was just always, no matter what I was doing, it was always there. I could always feel it. I had a huge, strong relationship with my dad. We went everywhere together. We did rodeos, we did concerts, ball games, fishing, hunting. We were always together. And he always drilled it into my head, and my mom did too. But she had her own things that kind of spilled over into I guess, on how she held on to things and didn't let them go. And she spoke her mind, and sometimes it was pretty harsh. And I'm not trying to speak ill of my mom, because she would have given you the shirt off her back. She helped in so many ways throughout my story. However, she was pretty hard on me. A lot of times throughout my life, I felt like I was never good enough, that I was never going to live up to expectations. I didn't hang out with the right crowd, or I didn't do this right, or I didn't do that right. And I've always been a jeans and t-shirt kind of girl. I just don't like to dress up. I don't get into the makeup and stuff. And however, that kind of got in my head that I was just never going to be enough. So that spilled over into a lot of things, especially once I got to be a teenager, because I found myself looking for the unconditional love that I needed in other places. Even in those times, though, it felt like even if I did fall back, I always felt, I knew that God was with me. He was, whether it be a scripture pop in my head or a song pop in my head or something, I always knew he was there. When I got to be a teenager, though, of course, just like most teenage girls, you find love and you think it's the greatest thing that ever happened to you, and then things happen. And it seems like throughout my life, in those places where I would look for love elsewhere, it was just another point proving you're not enough. Every relationship that I was ever in, I was cheated on, with the exception of one. As I was a teenager, I attended church, of course, just about every Sunday. But I would get really, really hot and just like really on fire for Christ. And then people would start making fun of me, and I'd be like, okay, maybe this ain't so cool. Maybe I would just kind of lay off of it a little bit. Well, then I was about, I think I was 19 or 20, and I met the man that I ended up marrying. We were together for 14 years. He had a son that was 4, who to this day and will always be mine. Then we ended up having a daughter, and I tried my best to introduce them to church and to take them to church, and my son wasn't always with us, so I tried. My daughter, when she was little, we went to the same church I went to growing up when I was little bitty, and I was always told, train up a child in the way they'll go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. She got up every Sunday and sang Jesus Loves Me every Sunday, and I could see it in her. But whenever, I think it was in 2019, 2019, my husband and I had been arguing a lot, and I knew something just wasn't right. And then one night he just looked at me and said, "I'm not in love with you anymore." And that's when the downward spiral really hit. Of course, instead of sitting and talking to him one night, on the night he told me, I went to a friend's house and I started drinking. And that was kind of a curse that I carried with me through my teenage years, because the first drink that I got became one of those things, not that I would just drink for the fun of it or to be social. I started getting into okay, well, I'm going to start drinking and I'll just drown it. And then after we got a divorce, it became more than a social thing. It became I'm sitting on the back porch with a bottle of whiskey and I drank alone a lot. And then we ended up getting a divorce. It was final in 2020. I didn't date anybody for a year. And started dating somebody. And our first date was to church. And I thought it was going to be exactly what I'd always wanted. However, once again, I was looking for that unconditional love, and I looked in other men. I looked in drinking, and neither one of them ever got me anywhere. However, that went on for about 3 or 4 years, and things just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And There were a lot of things said to me that I now know are not true. A lot of stuff spoke over me that I know now is not true. Everything from "you're not a woman" to 5 minutes later, "you're the best thing that ever happened to me," back to "you don't love God, you're not a..." It was just the back and forth manipulation, love bombing kind of thing, and it went on for about 3 or 4 years. Uh, and that really, really messed me up. So the drinking got worse. And I just thought the more I drank, I just drowned it and the thoughts would go away. But they didn't. And it developed into an addiction. And even the people that I was closest to, that I talked to on a daily basis, had no idea that it was my two best friends that I talked to daily, had no idea. It got to the point where I had a rewards card at the liquor store that I went to, and they knew me by name and they knew what I was coming to get. So I got to the point where I would find any little reason to go buy a bottle, or I would be with somebody and we'd be drinking and I'd leave there and I'd leave in time that I knew the liquor store was still open, and then I'd stop and get another fifth and I'd take it home. And at that time my daughter was a teenager and she would be with friends or something, and I would get that fifth and I'd go home and I'd drink the whole bottle by myself. And I can remember several nights laying in the bathroom floor because it was cold and just begging God, please, please just end this. I can't do it anymore. At one point, depression was one of those things that ran in our family. I mean, it was pretty rampant. At that time, I was on depression medicine. I was on anxiety medicine. I had to take something to help me sleep, and I would take it with the whiskey. And I was depending on everything but God, even though all this time I can still remember, like, randomly, scripture that I grew up with would hit my mind and be like, okay, stop doing this. But I'd be like, yeah, you're just losing it. I thought it was just in my head, I guess, like my voice speaking, but I'm learning more and more that the whole time it wasn't my voice. Uh, music has always been a huge part of my life. I was a huge country music fan, always have been, and Hank Jr. was one of my favorites. There probably is not many Hank songs that I don't know every word to, but there was one called "Devil in a Bottle." And I can remember on several nights that I would be sitting there alone and I'd sit there and listen to that song on repeat. And the chorus of it says, "There's a devil in the bottle and he wants to see me dead." And he did. Hindsight's 2020, and I realize now that there's a reason he wanted to see me dead, because he didn't want me to continue on with what I had grown up with, whether I listened to it or not. God was always there. He never left me. And there was a scripture that when things would go really bad, it seemed like it would just pop up everywhere. It was John 10:10. devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come so that they may have life more abundantly. And it was weird how it would happen because it would show up in some of the most random spots and I'd just kind of shake it off. But now I look back and I'm like, I remember that. I remember what I was doing and I remember that popping up. So, yes, fast forward to when this last year, it had gotten really, really bad. I was drinking way more than anybody knew. My daughter she knew because she was there, unfortunately. And I had a friend pop up that I hadn't seen in like 18 years. And back when we hung out, he didn't believe, and he would usually tell me, just don't even say anything to me about God. And last September, he showed up out of nowhere, just like he always did, and popped up in my life, and he was like a completely different person. He started reminding me of what I told him at one time and the things that I said to him, and the fact that we just always had this bond. And one day we were talking. He lived about an hour and a half from me. And one day we were talking and he said, Kerry, you got to let it go. You got to quit holding on to things because you're never going to be able to heal if you don't let these things go. And the only place that you can give them to is to God. I got to see him after 18 years of not seeing each other. And he looked at me and he said, there she is. She's still in there. And that was kind of one of those moments that I was like, well, maybe she is still in there. Anyways, in the Bible, it says in Ecclesiastes, there's a time for every purpose under heaven. And I fully believe that at that moment, and God sent him to remind me who I was. It didn't last. We haven't spoke in over a year now. But maybe looking back, that was just the moment that God needed to remind me, hey, you're still there. I'm still in you and I'm still here. Well, then about a month after we quit talking, my dad had been fighting cancer for almost 10 years. And on October 1st of 2024, he passed. And that absolutely rocked my world. But like, I didn't really cry a whole lot, and I thought something was wrong with me. But it absolutely broke me. But at that moment, I had found myself praying more, and I was listening to music, and I was listening to sermons and all this stuff. But my dad was gone. And he always said that he didn't want a preacher preaching his funeral. He wanted us to get up and tell something we learned from him. So the night before his funeral, I sat at my kitchen table with my Bible open, my bourbon glass, and a fifth of Jack Daniels, knowing full well that he probably would have chewed me up one side and down the other because he never drank. If he would have known how bad it was. And he was that person that would call me randomly and be like, I need you to come over here. We need to sit down and talk. And he would somehow know what I had been doing and But before I would walk out the door, he always told me, I love you. I'm not happy with some of the things you're doing, but that'll never change. And I'm praying for you. And I fully believe that. He was my best friend. So that next day, I got up and I gave what I had to say. And I got him up in front of a room full of people, which is not my thing. I don't like talking in front of people. People scare me. Public speaking was never a strong suit of mine. But I got up in front of a lot of people and told everybody what my daddy taught me. And that was that no matter how quiet it is, God is always there. And He's always going to lead you through. Even knowing that the night before, as I sat there and wrote all of that, I wasn't sitting there doing it on my own. I was sitting there writing it with a bottle of Jack Daniels. I laid on the floor that night in the bathroom just begging God to take me. Like I was done. In the past, I had written letters to my kids and told them goodbye. And I was like, I don't know that I'll ever have the guts to actually do anything, but I'd given up. After his funeral was over, um, a couple days later, an old friend had came by the house because she had started noticing some things. And in the depression and the things that had happened over the years, I just got to the point where I had literally given up. I let my house go. All I did on my off days from work was sleep. And the days that I would work, I worked in healthcare, and I would get up and I'd go do my 12-hour shift. I would stop sometimes on the way home at the liquor store, and maybe I wouldn't get a fifth, but I'd stop and get something. And go home and drink myself back to sleep and get up and do it all over again. I wasn't living. I was breathing. That was it. I didn't want to. Anxiety attacks were horrible. It was on a daily. Like I couldn't breathe. I it was it was awful. But my house had gotten to a point where nobody should have been living there. And a couple of friends came over and we started cleaning the house out and everything. And my daughter kind of laid the law down and she said, look, you're either going to get help and you're going to start attending some meetings, or I'm gone. I'm out. And I couldn't let that happen. So the following Wednesday, I started attending a meeting. I took my last drink the 2 days after we buried my dad. And I started going to some meetings, and I still, I found myself sitting in the church parking lot, and I was like, I don't want to go in here. This is ridiculous. This is going to do nothing. And even for about the first month that I was going, I still felt nothing. Like I knew I had no choice, because if I didn't stop drinking, then I was going to lose my daughter. But I wasn't 100% into it. I hadn't completely given it up yet. But then my sister got in contact with a friend of hers, and he in turn got into contact with me and basically said, okay, we have a meeting at this church at this time, be there. So that following Friday, I started attending Field of Grace. It we called Power of Grace. And I showed up, and it was like the minute that I walked in, it was like, wow. Like I still can't really explain that feeling, but it felt like home. For a few weeks prior to that, like I had been praying more and I had been reading more, and where I was at, I felt like I wasn't being spiritually fed. I was still watching church online every Sunday and all this stuff, and I had been for a few years, but I just I wasn't feeling anything. And I guess that's where we get ourselves into trouble, because if you don't feel anything, then you don't feel like anything's being done. But I had been watching Field of Grace online for a couple weeks, I guess. And when I turned it on the first time, the worship team was on there and they were singing a song called Made for More. And it was like those lyrics just hit me. I wasn't made to be tending a grave. And so I started coming to Power of Grace. And that next Sunday, I attended a sermon actually here and not online. And the first sermon that he preached on was 1 Peter 5:8-10. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And it basically just says, persevere, keep pushing. And then I started coming more and more, and I was attending the meetings every Friday. And then something that the pastor said absolutely floored me. And even through growing up in church, I had never looked at it this way. He said, when you're reading the Bible, think of it as these people are no different than us. They had the same problems we had. They had the same fears. They did the same things. I mean, you had adulterers, you had thieves, you had tax collectors, you had all these people. And they're no different than we are in our sin. But then when they came to Jesus, they were new people. And I had never thought of it that way. So, like, I started thinking about it. And in the times that I felt the most alone, and I look back now, I was never alone. He was always there. And I went home that day and I read about the woman at the well. And though I had heard that story so many times, it hit me like, holy cow, I am that woman. I have looked for years for unconditional love, and I had looked for, I just thirsted for something. And all the while it was right there. And I think I know I've even told the pastor a couple times, I'm like, it's funny when you get a taste of that living water, how much it quenches thirst from everything else. I had looked for that thirst to be quenched in men. I looked for it in alcohol and never did until that realization that we were no different. And then slowly but surely, and I still, every Sunday, I find myself giving something else to God because I'm done. Like, I don't want it anymore. At that time, my dad had passed away. My mom was really, really sick. So he passed away on October 1st. My mom went into the hospital a couple times after that. I was staying with her, so she wasn't alone. And then on November 29th, I was sitting in the hospital right next to her, and she took her last breath. But it was almost like a peace in the room. And I remember telling her, "You don't have to worry anymore, Mama." And at that time, I was over a month sober. I hadn't had a drink in a month. And where most times that would have been more than enough reason to relapse and go get a bottle. It was like, I don't want it anymore. At that time, as I said, my house wasn't livable. My mom had gotten me a camper and I was running the electric through the house and living in the camper. And my daughter had came back home from her friend's house and it was just she and I in this teeny tiny little camper. But a lot grew in that teeny tiny camper. She started to trust me again. We had a relationship back again because we always were so close. And she always knew that no matter what she did or where she was at, she could always come to Mama. And we started finding out that that relationship was still there. That Christmas, she looked at me and she said, "Yeah, this is great. I thank you for the gifts and everything, but the best gift that I've gotten this year was getting my mama back." So it seems like, it doesn't seem like, I know for a fact that the more that I leaned into God and the more that I started to read and that I developed a relationship with God, like all these doors started opening. I was heartbroken completely that my parents were gone, but I also knew that there were no more doctor's appointments, no more treatments, no more sickness. They're free now and it wasn't goodbye, it's see you later. But just because they were gone didn't mean that I needed to bury myself back into that bottle again. And God just, He never left. Um, and I've been sober for a year now, actually 13 months last week. Writing has always been a huge outlet for me. So one day after church, I had this thought come through my head, and I was sitting in my car with my windows rolled down, and I just started writing. And this is what I got. There was a devil in the bottle that wanted to see me dead, but there was a Savior that took death on a cross so I could have life. There was a great physician who felt me touch the hem of his garment that healed me and set me free. There was a good shepherd who left the 99 to come find me. There was a father that saw me coming home and he ran to me with open arms. There was a man at the well that taught me about the living water so that I no longer had to thirst. No matter where you are in your life at this very moment, Paul says in the book of Romans that nothing can separate us from the love of God. Not once in your life has he ever left or forsaken you, and that is a promise that will never be broken. No matter where you go or what you do or what you have done, he loves you. He's just waiting on you to lay everything at his feet so he can heal all those parts that are broken. He took it all on that cross so that you don't have to keep it anymore. I'm not, I, nobody's ever perfect. However, you don't have to wait until you think you are perfect. You come to him and he'll make you into somebody new. And I'll tell you that every day I find something new that he's healed in me. And I wouldn't trade that for every bottle of whiskey in the world. I wouldn't trade the relationship that I have with my kids now. A year ago, my granddaughter didn't even know who I was, and now it's Grammy, Grammy, Grammy. We lived in a camper for it was up until about a month ago. But that little camper healed a lot. It made me appreciate things so much more. Materials mean nothing. Like, yeah, it's nice to have some cool stuff or whatever, but I wake up every morning and thank God that he gave me another breath. Whereas a year and a half ago, I was begging him every morning to just not let me wake up. There's still a lot in me that needs to be healed, and I'm working on that daily. I've met some amazing people coming to church here, but I have to say that one of the coolest things that I have achieved here is learning to have a real relationship with God. I don't take things for granted like I used to. I'm not thirsty anymore because there's a thirst in me now for a little different. Like, I find myself, like, I'll hear somebody talk about a story in the Bible that I'd never heard, and I'm like, I need to go read that. I want to know about that. Or even in my groups on Friday night, it's not just a group. We're family. We don't leave without saying I love you, and like, we're a part of each other's lives. We lean on each other, and God has put so many amazing people when I felt so alone. He's put so many amazing people in my life now that I know I can shoot him a message and be like, hey, I'm feeling this kind of way. This isn't right. I know I can pray it away, but where two or more are gathered, I'm there also. Um, so can you pray for this? The biggest thing that I have gained without a doubt is the fact that I've always wanted to take care of people. My mom was a nurse. I've worked in healthcare for 21 years now. But mental health was my thing. And I think it was because I hurt so bad inside. I didn't want anybody else to ever feel that again. And God's opened some doors. I got accepted into the U of L program for social work. A week later, I thought I was going in from all the classes I had taken before. I thought I was going in as a sophomore, and I got an email saying, welcome senior. And then the following week, I got accepted into the social work program, and I didn't know I even applied for it. So he's opening doors, and I feel like he saved my life in more ways than I can ever put into words. And the best way that I could ever thank him is to show other people him. I still don't have this thing figured out, and I probably never will. We'd never have everything completely figured out, because if we did, then what would we need God for? But he's definitely made a difference in my life, and I came to him at the lowest of low. I was laying in my bathroom floor, and he changed my life. So now it's my turn to help somebody else. And I've said it over and over. It's time for me to take the buckets in and help somebody else not be thirsty. And that's my story for his glory.